Well, greetings and shalom. I am Adrian Scott, and I welcome you to Truth and Testimony, the broadcast. It is time for some more shekels for your thoughts, and just to give some food for thought, this is kind of an interesting topic. I thought it would be interesting to tackle this. There's a few things that are of interest to me personally, and one is evolution and creation. This is a topic that I do touch on. I know that I've been a little more sparse on that on this channel, mostly because really I want to try to speak from a place of having some information, and it is something that I'm passionate about. It is something that, because I came from kind of one tradition to the other, from being an evolutionist to being a creationist, so it has real import to me. And archaeology, I've said, particularly biblical archaeology, but really any archaeology, is something that I've always been utterly fascinated by and know effectively nothing about. But I'm always watching little videos where they've made another archaeological discovery, and I'm checking into it, and so that's one area that gets me. Another one is Christians doing Bible things in Bible ways, and in many cases are not, and they should be. Like I'm talking about Christians that claim this title, that claim to live this way, yet literally I have encountered some that can't even tell you what the name of the four Gospels are in the New Testament: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Like, they don't even know that, which all that really tells me, it doesn't make them an awful person or stupid or anything like that. It just tells me that they're not spending as much time in that word as they should be. And so that's one that is near and dear to me as well, is this, we should know this word. This is a word, as an evolutionist, that I thought was a book of fairy tales and superstitions. I think the way I phrased it at one point when I was still an evolutionist was, a book of fairy tales and superstitions for small-minded people that needed a crutch to get through their day-to-day lives. I repent for saying that and believing that. I really do. My perspective, it goes without saying, has changed on that, and I don't think that anymore. I now utterly believe, and you've seen it in most of the videos I do, that the Bible is our source of life. It is a source of blessing. It is a source of freedom for us. It is also a source of reproof and education to get away from doing things we shouldn't be doing, to doing things the way the God of the universe, our creator, has told us to do it. So that's another one that gets to me. And another one is the history of the Bible. Because again, the Bible is just been a big thing to me. Where did the Bible come from? What are the original languages? How did it, change to get to what we're reading today? A lot of these, we got translations that are still coming out in modern times that we've never seen before, and I won't get into the topic of those, but it's just, what are the traditions of some of this stuff? So this kind of is a video. I know that was a super long intro. Sorry, but the basic topic here that I wanted to get into is kind of the origins of the English Bible, and where did this come from? For a lot of people, they may look at one of the oldest, and it is on the old side, no doubt, of the English versions of the Bible being the King James Bible. But it actually goes back to quite a few years, probably about 100 or so years before that, were the first round of English Bibles and English translations that we saw. And one reason why I wanted to do this video was to just kind of bring this information to light, but frankly, also to give a nod and a real show some gratitude and appreciation for the people that helped to bring this to us, because it goes without saying that they went through major tribulations and persecution to do this, and in many cases, full-on execution to bring this to us. So as we kind of take a little look at the origins of the English translations of the Bibles, I have a couple of little notes here I'm going to be referring to. So, I open it up by saying, we do tend to think of the King James as one of the older versions of the English Bible, and it is. However, As a note, and we take it way back, we're going all the way back to the late 1300s, where we see the first English Bible, and this was a complete Bible, Old and New Testament, and it was done by John Wycliffe, and that again was in the late 1300s. So it was the complete Bible, Old and New Testament, and there's a reason for that. When I get to the next version or two, you'll understand why I'm saying that. What's interesting about this translation done by Wycliffe is that this was a translation that was done from the Latin Vulgate. So it was done from the Latin version of the Bible, which was the Bible used by the Catholic Church at that time. I don't know that there were necessarily a whole ton of access to other sources like Hebrew or Greek manuscripts. I don't know what the state of that was at the time, but whatever the case was, he used the Latin Vulgate to make his English translation of the Bible. It is interesting to note that, again, the Latin Vulgate at this point that Wycliffe was doing this was the official Bible used by the Catholic Church. Now, Wycliffe and his followers were vocal critics of the Catholic Church. I think, if I remember right, one of the primary reasons for that was had to do with King Henry VIII wanted to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, or Aragon, to instead marry, what was her name, Anne Boleyn or Boleyn? Ultimately, I believe that act by King Henry VIII is where we got the Church of England from. And if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure that's either the same thing as the Anglican Church, or the Anglican Church came out of that. But that was an act of, because in the Catholic Church at that time, divorce was not permitted. But King Henry VIII wanted a divorce. He wanted to get his marriage annulled to this person so he could get together with this other person. And so Wycliffe and his followers were definitely vocal critics of the Catholic Church, in large part because of that. And because of their opposition to the Catholic Church, they were accused by the Church of heresy. So now they're being persecuted, and it was difficult to do things in that kind of a scenario. Interesting to note about this version done by Wycliffe that it was not authorized or sanctioned by the church, but it was very popular among the people. So this starts a trend. It starts a trend, number one, of just the regular layperson having access to the Bible for themselves. And number two, that this persecution against people trying to make these English translations. Now, for both of those reasons, one of the key factors of that, or why that was going on, was the Catholic Church really was in a practice of wanting to control the Word of God, as it were. So that's why they had it in the Latin. Most people didn't speak Latin, and therefore the average person generally would have to go to a priest or a member of the clergy to have them explain things and teach them about Scripture, which just kind of kept them in control. It was also a way for them to raise money so they could build more churches, etc., etc. But it all was reliant on the people needing these priests and clergy to teach them and explain the Bible to them because they couldn't read it for themselves. So the Catholic Church did not want the Bible getting translated into the tongue of the common people, as it were. So Wycliffe, first version of the Bible, complete Old and New Testament, translated from the Latin Vulgate. Now, the first Bible, which kind of follows up on that, that was actually one of the things that is a standout of the King James Version is the fact that it is translated from original Hebrew and Greek sources, maybe better than just about any other translation out there, or as good as any other top translation, that it was done from the Hebrew and Greek. But it wasn't the first Bible to be translated from the Hebrew or Greek. This one gets more interesting, and where we get a really prolific name. So the first Bible to be translated from the Hebrew and Greek was done by William Tyndale. And I think we still have Tyndale Publishers today, obviously named after this individual. The interesting things to note about this. So first off, this was in the early 1500s that William Tyndale was working on this. And the other thing to note is he only ever was able to do the New Testament. He got all of the New Testament translated from Hebrew and Greek sources into English. He was working on doing a translation of the Old Testament. Oh, no, and actually I should stand corrected. It wasn't Wycliffe that was opposed to King Henry's marriage. It was Tyndale. That was it. Wrong individual, sorry. It was William Tyndale that was opposed to King Henry VIII annulling his marriage, and that's what put them a lot at odds. And he had charges. He was a wanted man after doing that and trying to make this Bible into English, which they were trying to still stop at this point. So, in this opposition of King Henry VIII and opposition against, therefore, the Catholic Church, or against what King Henry VIII was doing in breaking away from the Catholic Church, ended up getting himself on the naughty list, as it were. And he was working on the Old Testament in 1535 when he ended up getting betrayed by some people close to him. He was arrested, tried, and executed on charges of heresy before he was able to finish the Old Testament. So the first translation, English translation of the Bible from Hebrew and Greek sources is William Tyndale in early 1500s, not completing the Old Testament. I get the impression he probably was a good chunk of the way through that, because the next follow-up to that would be a Bible that came to be known as the Coverdale Bible. So Miles Coverdale was a friend and a fellow translator of William Tyndale, and they were working on this stuff together. And after Tyndale's execution, Miles Coverdale completed the translation of the Old Testament from Hebrew and Greek in, I believe, 1535. And that Bible, again, was called the Coverdale Bible. It was also another claim to fame for that one. The Coverdale Bible was the first Bible ever to be printed. So it has that claim to fame to it. It gets interesting with the Coverdale Bible because just a couple of years after it comes out, a revision of it is sanctioned to be done, and I can't remember the guy's full name, but he was going under an alias, and the last name was Matthew, Thomas Matthew, or something to that effect. And so this version, which came out in 1537, was called the Matthew Bible. It was a revision, just a straight up revision of the Bible that was done by Tyndale and Coverdale. Now, it gets even more interesting because it's like he said, she said kind of thing going back and forth. Because 2 years later in 1539, Miles Coverdale himself does a revision of the revision. So he does a revision of the Matthew Bible, which was a revision of the Bible that he had done. And this revision came out called the Great Bible. And there's no fancy thing to this. It was simply called that because of the size of it. Apparently it was huge. So they called it the Great Bible. And what is interesting about that is that revision of the revision ended up being the first officially sanctioned Bible. This Great Bible was the first officially sanctioned Bible. The next major Bible on the list, and this is probably the first one that I started getting into and I would refer to, and I still have a copy of it that I refer to from time to time, is something called the Geneva Bible, which came out around 1560. Now, this Bible was immensely popular amongst lay people and clergy, and it stayed that way for a long period of time. It was the go-to for a long period of time. So really, that is probably the first big English translation of the Bible. The real big one is this Geneva Bible. And for people watching, this might be the first one where maybe you've heard that name before, the Geneva Bible. There's a couple of, or maybe the most interesting point to this thing, I was going to say there's a couple of things. They did some new printing practices at this point, using a different type font to make it easier to read. One of the reasons why it was so popular is it was easier to read, but it's also the first Bible to introduce the idea of verses. So the first time we ever see verses on a Bible is in the Geneva Bible. So there's one for you. Now there's another one on the list, and I'm not going to talk a lot about this. It really was not significant. It was called the Bishop's Bible. It was an attempt to do a translation opposed to the Geneva Bible, but the Geneva Bible there wasn't anything remarkable about this Bishop's Bible, and it did not take over any popularity from the Geneva Bible. It's really, the Geneva Bible was the go-to for English translations right up until the King James. However, the one big version that came out prior to the King James would be something called the Douay-Rheims. Now, there's a few interesting points about this Douay-Rheims. So this was in the late 1500s to early 1600s, because the New Testament, if I remember this right, the New Testament was translated first, and that was translated in an area called Reims, I believe in France, and that was in the late 1500s. So it was kind of the Reims New Testament Bible. Then in the early 1600s, it might be 1608 to 1610, somewhere in that range, they did a translation of the Old Testament in a region called Douay. And so they put the two together. You got the Old Testament and the Old Testament, and they just took the name Douay-Rheims. And so what stands out insignificant about the Douay-Rheims Bible is, now, first off, this translation, it was another one that was done from the Latin. And it was translated specifically for the church clergy in that from the Latin. They did this in an effort to combat what they perceived as inadequacies that were creeping into the Protestant translations. They referred to them as. So all these other ones by Wycliffe and Tyndale and Coverdale and these other guys. It is also the first complete Catholic version of the Bible in English. And there's some real interesting things about the Douay-Rheims. If you're interested in doing a little research for yourself, I'm not going to go there. This is my challenge to you. I'm assigning homework. Take a look at the 10 Commandments in the Douay-Rheims. Go check it out. Compare it to the King James or other versions like that, and you might be surprised at what you find. And of course, I mean, at that point, the Douay-Rheims, which I still think is a primary source in the Catholic Church to this day, that was a big one. So really, your two players at this point were the Geneva Bible and the Douay-Rheims. Those were the two big boys on the block, as it were, up until we get to the early, I think it was 1604, somewhere right in there, where the King James version of the Bible was originally commissioned. It took a number of years to get it done. An interesting note, and of course now I'm talking about the King James version, the first officially released completed version of the King James came out in 1611. As an interesting little side note, what we're reading today as the King James is actually not that 1611 version. There was an updated version of the same Bible that came out, was right around 1629, 1635. There might have been more than one reprint, but it was all in that range. And a rationale given for the updates were to correct a bunch of printing errors and some other mistakes that were discovered, and they just wanted to correct them. So what we're actually reading today in our King James versions of the Bibles is actually that 1629 or 1635 version, not the original 1611. So there's another piece of homework, because you can find a few differences from the 1629 to the 1611. There were a couple of significant things that were actually changed. So you can research that one on your own as well. But yeah, so that kind of leads us up in this progression through the English translations of the Bible. So again, hats off and acknowledgement to John Wycliffe, to William Tyndale, to Miles Coverdale, and to all the people associated with them and that followed after them. It is because of the tremendous work that they did under intense persecution, and like I said, even up to execution, to be able to get an English version of the Bible that we now just have so readily available in our world today in so many different flavors. But it's all thanks to this group of people. There's a few others to mention in their translations out of the Latin or away from the Latin, but I won't get it. There's a German one, I think it was the Erasmus or something to that effect. But I'm keying more specifically on really the English translations, as I am an English speaker, and I'm sure most of the people watching my video, if English isn't your first language, you're still at least proficient at it, so you know English, and and that's just kind of a little bit of the history of that. I summarize by just mentioning again this point that the Catholic Church for a long time really tried to control the flow of this word and the understanding of it, that you would have to go through them to get their perceived take on it. Because once again, I don't want people to be discouraged, but the Catholic Church, I think, has some dark origins. And it, once again, is not an indictment of people within the Catholic Church. But, I would hope that information, whether it's coming from me or any other source, could make its way into that, and that they'd have an opportunity to discover the real blessing of God's word in its purer form outside of a system like that, which is a system that is steeped in a lot of not good traditions, straight up pagan traditions. I mean, really, the word Catholic itself means universal. And so at the idea of the formation of this Catholic Church was a universal church. It was whatever you used to follow, whatever you used to believe, bring it on in, let's do it. We're just going to repaint it, and we're going to say we're doing it for Jesus, and we're going to call it this Catholic system, because they were trying to bolster their numbers and give themselves more power and more influence. So it's just like, you can't just tell people to drop everything that they ever knew. Just bring it with you. And we'll fit it in, and we'll say that we're doing it for some saint, or we'll say we're doing it for Jesus. So there is the history of some of the English Bible, and a little bit of history maybe of the Catholic Church. Go and educate yourself. Once again, don't take my word for it. I'm not perfect. I have errors and inconsistencies, I'm sure, in some of the information that I have. I'm going with the best that I have, and I've said it in numerous videos, but I think I'm right, and that's why I'm making the video. But I recognize that I could be off on some of this stuff. I'm always open to correction, but I point out again that if you're going to correct me, feel free to do so, but you need to do it from the scriptures. Simply pointing fingers and name calling is not going to go anywhere with me, nor do I think it should go anywhere with anyone else either. So I will wrap up the video there. I do say thank you for watching. If you stuck it out to this point, give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel if you've not had a chance to do so yet, and change your notification bell to all so that you're notified to anything that Ray or I are providing to the channel. And also, as I've been saying recently in some of my videos, there are some big things coming up on the channel. I could really see this channel booming, and I think some of them could be some real pleasant surprises for people. And so you don't want to miss any of that. And the best way to ensure that you don't, again, is to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so that you are receiving those notifications. Having said that, one thing that I don't think I've said nearly enough, that I just wanted to take a quick opportunity and say, for the people that have been here since the early days of this channel, I really don't think we say it enough, but I just wanted to thank you all so much for being here, being a part of this community, and checking out the videos that Ray and I are doing, as well as Sean back in the day. We can't forget about him. He was an integral part of this at kind of the foundation and formation of this channel. And, that we do appreciate you being here. And really, you are the reason why we're doing what we're doing with this channel, is just for you right there. So again, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. I know Ray feels the same way, so I can speak on his behalf on this one, I'm pretty sure. So thanks again. I do wish blessings to all of you in the name of Yeshua, our Messiah, and say have a great week, a blessed week, and shalom, and bye for now.